During the worst hours of the storm, volunteer firefighter Dana Price made solo trips by boat into flooded neighborhoods, rescuing 11 people, including a bedridden woman and 3 small children. With official resources overwhelmed, Price launched her own kayak from the fire station and worked through the night. "I just couldn't sit there and wait," she said. Battling wind, darkness, and floating wreckage, she pulled one family from a rooftop using bed sheets as rope. Residents are calling her a hero. "She didn't hesitate," one survivor said. "She saved us when no one else could get through." The agricultural sector suffered heavy losses, with initial reports indicating over 60% of local crops destroyed. Grain silos crumpled like cans, and irrigation systems were twisted beyond recognition. Dozens of livestock barns collapsed, and fencing across thousands of acres was torn away. Farmers say it could take years to recover. One dairy cooperative reported 180 animals missing or dead. The State Agricultural Board is coordinating emergency aid and veterinary support in the hardest-hit rural zones. As winds intensified and their home began to shake, the Patel family abandoned their living room and climbed into the walk-in freezer at the back of their restaurant. With wind screaming outside and parts of the roof tearing away, they sat in darkness for over an hour, surrounded by bags of frozen vegetables and crates of meat. "It was the only room with no windows and a steel door," said Mrs. Patel. When they emerged, the dining area was destroyed, but the freezer was untouched. "Cold never felt so safe," joked their teenage son. First responders were stunned to find an SUV lodged halfway into the second-floor balcony of an apartment complex. According to witnesses, the parked vehicle was lifted by extreme winds during the hurricane's peak and hurled across a 40-foot embankment. No one was inside the SUV, and the residents of the affected apartment were unharmed. "I thought it was a bomb going off," said one tenant. Engineers say wind acceleration between nearby buildings likely created a tunnel effect. "It wasn't just strong wind. It was focused, violent wind," said a structural analyst on scene. When the hurricane hit, 16-year-old Brianna lost nearly everything. Her family's home was badly damaged, and most of their belongings vanished in the wind. But 3 days later, a neighbor found her bright blue prom dress tangled in a tree 3 miles away, still intact. "It sounds silly," she said, "but it was the one thing that felt normal." Volunteers cleaned and restored it. Local businesses are now planning a community prom for displaced teens. "After everything we've lost," Brianna said, "this one dress being found made it feel like hope's still out there." When the hurricane hit, 74-year-old Tom Delaney refused to leave his hilltop cabin. He reinforced the windows, tied himself to a structural beam with old climbing rope, and waited. Outside, winds tore shingles and trees from the ground. Inside, the house trembled, but held. It was like standing in the path of a train for 5 hours, he said. When the storm passed, neighbors found him covered in dust, sipping cold coffee, and still strapped in. "Stubborn doesn't begin to cover it," his daughter joked. Officials warn others not to follow his example, despite the outcome. A 30-foot metal billboard was torn from its supports and hurled through the second-story window of a downtown apartment complex. Miraculously, no one was in the room when it hit. The wind-carried structure demolished furniture, shattered glass, and embedded part of itself into the opposite wall. "It sounded like a bomb went off," said a neighbor. Fire officials said if the impact had happened an hour earlier, during a birthday party in the same unit, there would have been fatalities. The billboard's remains were later found 4 blocks away. Moments before a violent gust lifted their camper off the ground, 9-year-old Tyler was yanked out by his older sister, who heard the structure creaking. "I don't know why, but I just grabbed him and ran," she said. Seconds later, the wind tossed the camper 50 feet across a field, smashing it into trees. The family had ignored evacuation orders, thinking the storm wouldn't hit hard. Officials say the siblings narrowly avoided tragedy. "If she had waited even 5 seconds more," a firefighter said, "we'd be telling a different story."
Isso é a natureza. Barra Shopping Sul.
A caravan of RVs and pickup trucks crawled along the interstate, packed with families, pets, and everything they could strap down. Some pulled boats, others had tarps over furniture. Gas ran out in 2 towns, and the National Guard airlifted fuel to stranded drivers. It was the largest civilian evacuation the county had seen since the 1990s, with more than 150,000 people leaving in under 48 hours. Officials gave coastal towns 36 hours to evacuate. Despite warnings, some chose to stay. In one beachside community, only 14 of 113 residents left. Emergency responders recorded final GPS coordinates of every home. "They were polite but firm," one woman recalled. By the time she changed her mind, the roads were flooded. She was rescued 4 days later by helicopter. Paramedics carried a boy with cerebral palsy down 4 flights of stairs after the elevator failed and rising water threatened the building. His wheelchair was damaged, but they improvised with a rolling dolly and straps. "They didn't hesitate," said his mother. "They treated him like family." The family was later airlifted to a shelter equipped for medical needs. After the storm passed, silence fell so suddenly it felt wrong. Everything that once made sound, birds, cars, wind chimes, was gone or broken. James stood barefoot in the wet grass, staring at the sky. His house had lost half its roof, and a pine tree lay across his porch. But all he could think about was how quiet the world had become. "It felt like the wind stole the noise," he later told a neighbor. That night, he slept on a mattress in the garage, listening for anything to return. During peak gusts, Harold Grant stepped outside to check on his generator and was lifted off his feet by hurricane winds. He landed 30 feet away in a muddy ditch, stunned but alive. "It felt like a hand just picked me up and dropped me," he said. He suffered bruises and a fractured wrist, but managed to crawl back inside his home before the next wave of wind hit. Emergency crews later found trees snapped like twigs in his yard. "I'll never take wind warnings lightly again," Grant said from his hospital bed, smiling weakly. In one neighborhood, a woman returned to find her brother's car still in the driveway, keys inside but no sign of him. His phone last pinged from the cell tower nearby minutes before landfall. Teams searched surrounding woods and ditches. As of Friday, he remains missing. It is one of 127 open missing person cases linked to the storm. Preliminary assessments show that nearly 70% of homes and buildings in the coastal counties sustained wind-related damage during the recent hurricane. Over 40 mobile homes were completely overturned, and at least 12 commercial structures lost significant portions of their roofs. Utility poles were snapped along 19 major roads, and wind gusts were measured up to 129 miles per hour in some areas. Officials noted that older buildings were disproportionately affected. Insurance teams have begun documenting losses, with early estimates in the hundreds of millions. Emergency shelters remain at capacity as debris removal continues. A firefighter swam across a flooded intersection carrying a life vest in his teeth. Inside the stranded SUV was a woman 9 months pregnant. Contractions already started. With help from neighbors, she was floated on an air mattress to dry ground, then rushed to a hospital. Her baby was born 2 hours later, healthy and strong. He came into the world like a rescue mission, the father said. After the storm cleared, dozens of residents posted photos of found items to help neighbors reconnect with lost property. One family was shocked to see their trampoline wedged high in a pine tree 2 streets over, despite having tied it down. It looked like a nest for giant birds, the father said. The trampoline frame was twisted, but mostly intact. With help from a tree service, they managed to recover it. Next time, he laughed, I'm chaining it to the car. Officials continue to warn that unsecured backyard items can become deadly projectiles in hurricane winds. During the height of the storm, a power crew spotted a cow standing calmly on the second-story balcony of an abandoned motel. The wind had apparently pushed it up a ramp and into the building. The balcony railing kept it from falling. It was safely led back to ground level once winds died down. Locals now call it the flying cow miracle, and the motel owner says he's never seen anything like it. Still had better manners than most guests, he added.
I have no idea how strong these winds are, but I'm getting hailed on.
No one expected the tree to survive. It had stood in the town square for over a century, and as the storm hit, people watched it bend almost to the ground. The next morning, every building around it was damaged, windows shattered, signs ripped off, but the tree still stood, stripped of leaves but upright. Someone tied a ribbon to its trunk. 2 days later, others added flowers, candles, handwritten notes. It became a quiet monument to the idea that some things, even in chaos, can hold fast. The 140-year-old bell tower of St. Jude's Church collapsed overnight as hurricane winds exceeding 100 miles per hour battered the region. Witnesses described a thunderous cracking sound before the structure crumbled, scattering bricks across the square. No one was injured as the area had been evacuated, but the loss of the historic landmark hit locals hard. It was the soul of this town, one resident said through tears. Authorities say the winds were too strong for the aging structure to withstand. Volunteers are already planning to preserve parts of the wreckage for future restoration. After the hurricane and widespread flooding along the southern coast, rescue teams found 17-year-old Lucas Reyes floating alone through a submerged neighborhood, clinging to the door of a refrigerator. His family's trailer had been swept away overnight. Using jumper cables, Reyes tied himself to the door and drifted for 16 hours through dark, debris-filled waters. "I just kept thinking I had to stay awake," he told medics. Cold, dehydrated, and covered in cuts, he was taken to a local hospital and is expected to recover fully. Emergency officials called his survival remarkable and credited his quick thinking under pressure. Over 4,000 utility poles were downed across the affected zone, leaving more than 300,000 residents without power. Some communities may remain dark for weeks. Substations flooded, transmission lines snapped, and transformer fires were reported in multiple locations. Repair crews from 6 neighboring states have been dispatched, working 16-hour shifts. "We've never had this many lines down at once," said a utility spokesperson. Hospitals and shelters are running on backup generators, with fuel being airlifted into remote areas. A woman driving home before the worst of the winds hit watched in horror as the truck in front of her lifted off the highway and spun like a paper cup before crashing into a ditch. She pulled over, heart pounding, expecting the worst, but the driver crawled out, dazed but unharmed. "He looked more confused than injured," she said. Authorities said the wind reached over 110 miles per hour in that area, enough to lift lightweight vehicles off the road surface. As students and staff were being evacuated from the local high school, a massive gust tore off the gymnasium roof, sending metal panels flying across the parking lot. Surveillance footage shows teachers herding children out just moments before collapse. "We had 20 seconds, maybe less," said Principal Harris. No one was injured, though several cars were crushed by falling debris. Officials say the storm's wind speeds exceeded 120 miles per hour. The gym, built in the 1960s, was not rated for such conditions. Classes remained suspended. "We were lucky," Harris added. "That wind came for blood."
A backyard was left almost completely demolished after the destruction of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico.
More than 800 homes were damaged or destroyed across the 3-county region after the storm's landfall. Preliminary aerial surveys revealed entire neighborhoods with only concrete slabs remaining. Emergency services reported over 1,200 calls in the first 12 hours. Winds exceeding 130 miles per hour tore roofs from apartment buildings and scattered insulation across highways. Officials estimate it will take at least 6 months to restore power fully. "This is the worst structural damage we've seen in decades,"
The storm rips the roof off
said
a
the
shed
regional
with the
director of
owner
emergency
still on top
management.
of it. Besides a couple of bruises, he was completely fine.
The morning after, children wandered the neighborhood, pointing out what had changed. "That tree wasn't broken before," one said. "That trampoline wasn't there." They turned it into a game, spot the difference, but the parents watched in silence, tallying lost cars, collapsed roofs, shredded fences. One boy found a soggy storybook in a ditch and began reading aloud, sitting cross-legged on the wet sidewalk. Others joined him. For a moment, no one remembered the night's terror, only the sound of a child's voice trying to bring a story back to life. She didn't cry when the window broke or when the front door blew open. But when she saw her wedding photo floating face down in the living room, water pooling beneath it, something in her cracked. She picked it up, wiped it gently, and sat down in the middle of the chaos, holding it in her lap. "We'll be okay," she said aloud, though no one else was there. Hours later, when help arrived, she was still sitting there, calm, still, like part of the house itself. Three fishermen who stayed aboard their boat during the storm are missing. The vessel's GPS last pinged 2 miles offshore before signals were lost. Debris believed to be from the boat washed ashore Sunday. Search efforts continue by air and sea, though officials say conditions are challenging. The families are urging anyone with information to contact authorities.